Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. 2 Israeli embassy staffers are shot dead in Washington, D.C. The UK government proposes early releases for offenders to reduce a prison population. And introducing the pro-doping games, the first athletes sign up to the controversial enhanced games. Now to our top story, and 2 Israeli embassy staff have been shot dead in Washington, D.C. Yaron Leninsky and Sarah Lynn Milgram were killed as they left an event at the Capitol Jewish Museum. 30-year-old suspect Elias Rodriguez from Chicago, Illinois, is in police custody. He shouted "Free Palestine" as he was arrested. Earlier, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi told reporters the suspect would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
I can tell you security has been increased here as of last night. Our U.S. Marshals are working hand in hand to make sure the embassy is safe. Everything we know now, he acted alone. From everything we know now, this is an ongoing investigation. But you know, whether you're Jewish or not, be vigilant.
So thank you so much for joining me to discuss this and all of today's stories. I'm joined by correspondent and columnist Gemma White and Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight. Great to have both of you on the show. Thank you so much. So we've had a lot unfolding since this incident that did happen in Washington, D.C. What's been the reaction, Shane? And we've heard from President Donald Trump.
Yes, he sent out a tweet, well, it's not really a tweet, it's on Truth Social, where he said these horrible DC killings, based obviously on anti-Semitism, must end now. Capital exclamation mark. Hatred and radicalism have no place in the USA. So I think, like, I would even go further to say, like, this is not even horrible. It's everybody, has to condemn this, because, the killing of any humans, regardless of the cause, is just not acceptable, regardless of, your political persuasion, is the first thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that it's probably not surprising that it's happened, but I'm surprised that it's only happened now, because, if you think about it, it was late October 2023 when we had the initial Hamas attack. And there have been attacks in Germany, we've had attacks in France, and anti-Semitism has been on the rise. So I'm surprised that it hasn't happened before, to be honest.
And Gemma, there's been a whole lot of what looks like the changing of political rhetoric right now towards Israel in regards to what's been happening in Gaza. And I feel like this has also been ramping up in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it almost changes on I'd say daily, but almost hourly basis, it feels like now. And yes, as you said, the rhetoric has changed. The tension has ratcheted up. You can really feel it. So the Israeli minister, Amichai Chikli, he's accused the leaders of the UK, France and Canada of emboldening the forces of terror. Now, his words come as Keir Starmer, Macron and Carney. Earlier this week, they threatened concrete action against Israel if it continues its egregious military operations in Gaza. Obviously, this was said before this tragic shooting in Washington. But so after the shooting, Chikli said he was shocked and heartbroken, but he doubled down on his accusations against the UK, France and Canada, who, we have to remember, are allies of Israel. And when the Hamas attack happened last year, they were very committed to saying that Israel did have the right to defend itself. But now it seems that Israel is seeing that their calls for an end to what's happening in Gaza, they're seeing that as these countries coming against them. So we've not only seen a change in rhetoric, we've seen an absolute refusal to acknowledge any nuance, any changing in stance, any grey areas. It's either black or white. It's either you're with us or against.
Yeah, absolutely. And Netanyahu was speaking this evening, and he says Starmer, Macron and Carney are on the wrong side of history after Washington, D.C. killings. He's actually held a phone call with Donald Trump, and they have discussed what has happened with the shooting of the Israeli embassy.
Yeah, like I did see, like Trump said, he expressed deep sorrow in the call with the Israeli leader, and I kind of think if you compare it to sort of Zelensky and the Ukraine, I think Trump has said that he would solve the Ukraine in 24 hours, which is obviously it's been a couple of 24 hours since then, but I think he needs to use his power as the leader of the free world and the most powerful man to sort of come down on Netanyahu. I think in the same way that he has with Zelensky, and I think he should the attitude towards the two conflicts has been sort of radically different, and I think he needs to sort of maybe bring him to the Oval Office and sort of give a dressing down and see, because it's his policies that have led to these two unfortunate people in Washington losing their lives.
Do you think it was a missed opportunity that Trump didn't meet Netanyahu on his recent tour of the Middle East?
Yeah, I think so, and I think there needs to be a sort of recalibration and maybe sort of say, look, like my opinion is like up until October 7th, there was anti-Semitism, but Israel had the opportunity on the back of the Hamas attacks to garner global sympathy, which it did initially, and I think there was consensus that it had its right to defend itself, but I think now it's completely that's just completely gone now. There's probably, other than the US, I don't think there's many countries in the world that would support Israel, and I think anti-Semitism is wrong as well. Anyone is kind of wrong, but I also kind of think on the flip side of it is that in America itself, I think the clampdown on pro-Palestinian protests has also been bad, because it's just heightened the radicalism, which then leads to acts like this out of sort of almost desperation. So I think the US kind of needs to learn that maybe free and safe protests should still be allowed on both sides.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually really interesting because earlier I spoke to a former Israeli spokesman, Elon Levy, about the comments made by Israel's foreign minister, who's put some of the blame on leaders and officials abroad. Here's just what he had to say.
Yeah, this week we saw really an astonishing diplomatic betrayal by Israel's allies that have decided to use diplomatic pressure in order to force Israel to accept Hamas remaining in power in Gaza. Now, at the beginning of the war, they understood Hamas has to leave power or else a sustainable ceasefire is impossible, right? It's a jihadi regime committed to Israel's destruction. And if Hamas stays in power, the next war is only a matter of time. But those politicians have been pressured by the same violent public protests against Israel that we have seen, the same information warfare that we have seen against Israel that's poisoned public opinion. They're being affected by exactly the same trends. And that is why we've been saying it's so important to stand up to the increasingly deranged allegations being made against Israel, painting it as evil, because when you don't stamp out the lies about Israel, people decide to act on them. And it's leading to these sorts of political murders. That's why it's so important that people stand up against that hatred of Israel and attempts to glorify terrorism. These aren't just pro-Palestinian protests. It's glorifying Islamist terrorism on the streets of the West. And here is where it leads.
So there we are, Gemma and Shane. We just heard from Elon Levy there. And I did also speak to him a lot about the aid and Hamas, the aid blockade into Gaza. And, maybe that's a reaction and people are very upset about that. But of course, he was saying it's Hamas's fault. So I wonder where we lie right now when it comes to, is it time for Hamas to release the hostages? Could that possibly happen? Or is this just going to spread? Is this the beginning of, hatred that we might see in different countries?
The aid has gone through, hasn't it? Or there's a big disagreement now as how many trucks have actually gone through and then how many trucks actually made it to the warehouse. But the UN is saying that none of the trucks have actually been opened. So it's almost like a fake olive branch. What do you think?
Yeah, I think like, you know, I wouldn't like to be the leader of a country for many reasons, but I think when you're trying to deal with a situation like this, the way I look at it is kind of like back in sort of the 90s when you had like sort of plane hostages in that regard, because, you know, you've had this attack on these two people now in Washington. So if there's concessions seem to be made over in Gaza, then that's sort of setting a precedent that if you want to get something done in Gaza, then you attack an Israeli citizen in a Western country, and that's not something that we want to see happen either. So when you're a leader and you're trying to balance all of those sort of different variables, it's not something I'd like to be making a decision on, and when you're dealing literally with people's lives.
And Gemma, really, we're talking about this because two young people lost their lives, and they were about to get married. They had attended a charity event, and it's just quite a tragic situation. Yeah,
it is. They were just living their lives, and apparently they were, or the woman was involved in. She talked about how Israel and Palestine can sort of come to an agreement, can come to a truce. She was of that mind, thinking that way. So to have this happen, it's shocking, it's terrible. You know, two more people have lost their lives, you know, added to the toll that this war has already taken. Yeah, ultimately, at the end of the day, two more people have been murdered.
Absolutely, and it just seems to be something they're going to ramp up security across places like synagogues and in different places, just to make sure people are safe. And I think a lot of embassies, Israeli embassies around the world, are going to have the same thing happen. But once again, Shane, it just seems there seems to be no calming of rhetoric.
Yeah.
No, and I think it's just going to be escalated, you know, like the interviews like you just saw there. It's, you know, there needs to be a de-escalation of it, I think. Like, we need to know more about, you know, these two people in Washington. You know, there's been a lot of early details in terms of, you know, the gentleman had, you know, got an engagement ring. And I think we just need to humanify sort of these people, because I think, you know, there has been a lot of, you know, deaths obviously in Gaza, but I think any death is one too many.
No, absolutely. I'm sure we could speak about this for a lot longer, but thank you so much for your thoughts on that. I really appreciate it. Stay right there, and we'll back with you in just a minute. North Korea's newest warship suffered severe damage during what was meant to be a launch ceremony watched on by leader Kim Jong-un. Kim reacted with fury over the accident and said it brought, he claimed, the dignity and self-respect of the state to collapse. Patrick Fock reports.
North Korean state media reporting on the botched launch, described by naval analysts as catastrophic and a major embarrassment for the country.
After watching the whole course of the accident, the respected comrade Kim Jong-un made a stern assessment, saying that it was a serious accident and criminal act caused by absolute carelessness, irresponsibility, and unscientific empiricism, which is out of the bounds of possibility and could not be tolerated.
No images of the unnamed warship were released, and it's unclear whether the incident, which occurred on Wednesday, caused any injuries. But satellite images show the 5,000-ton destroyer docked at North Korea's Chongjin shipyard days beforehand. In a rare admission of failure, Pyongyang said a malfunction made the ship's stern slide prematurely into the water, crushing parts of the hull and leaving the bow stranded on the shipway. It marks a setback for the country's most ambitious naval modernization effort. In April, Kim, accompanied by his daughter, attended another ceremony to unveil the Choi Hyun, North Korea's first newly constructed destroyer in decades. At the time, it was presented with fanfare, with state media saying it would help strengthen preparedness against what Pyongyang called rising threats from the US and South Korea. Seoul says it had been tracking movements of the vessel that failed to launch.
Considering the size and scale, It is expected to be equipped with similar equipment to that of a Hyun-class warship, and it is currently lying sideways in the water.
The blunder could now cast doubt on North Korea's ability to scale its navy. Kim has called for the ship to be repaired by the end of next month before a key meeting of the ruling Workers' Party. Experts say a rushed launch likely led to the accident and warn hasty repairs could cause more problems down the line. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya.
Now, sex offenders in England and Wales could face chemical castration, and thousands of other offenders will be released after serving a third of their sentence. It's under new proposals by UK government ministers in a bid to curb overcrowding in prisons. The aim is to reduce the country's prison population by 9,800 people by 2028. Here's how UK Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood broke the news.
I also asked the review to consider how we manage sex offenders. The review has recommended we continue a pilot of so-called medication to manage problematic sexual arousal. I will go further, with a national rollout beginning in 2 regions covering 20 prisons, and I am exploring whether mandating the approach is possible. Of course, it is vital that this approach is taken alongside psychological interventions that target other causes of offending, like asserting power and control.
Shane, the overcrowding of prisons in the UK has been a hot topic for a long time on the political agenda. And if you live there, you know all about it. Explain how this will work in practice. So exactly what Labour want to do.
OK, so I dug up went to the government website and dug this up. So they do say it's an independent review, but it was commissioned by the government. So that sounds like an oxymoron to me, for starters. But anyway, over the last 14 years, when the Tories were in power, they added 500 places, which sounds obviously ridiculously low. And over the last 30 years, the prison population has doubled to almost like 90,000 people. And if you think about how much is that going to cost, so the average prisoner costs 53,000, nearly to 54,000. And the Labour government is putting aside almost like £5 billion into building all of these new prisons, which apparently they've said is the largest sort of prison building since, I think, Victorian era. But the problem is that this is not going to come until about 2030. So at the same time, by 2028, there's going to be, I think, 9,500 places more than they have to allocate. So it's kind of like, yes, we don't want to let people out of prison, but where are you going to put all of these extra criminals coming through the court system? So they've got a couple of ideas that they put forward. One, I don't think too many people will object to, is that foreign prisoners in the UK are going to be sent home earlier. I think it was previously, once they've done 50% of their sentence, now it's going to be 30%. Then the other one is what is called the progression model, which sounds like a PR expert came up with this sort of tactic. So as you said, it's going to, where your sentence is divided into third. And obviously this is based on sort of good behavior. So the first third, you'll be in prison. The second third, then you'll be in the probation sector. And then the last third, presumably if you haven't reoffended and you've been a nice guy or gal, depending, then you'll be out and about. Then the other initiative they're putting in place is that they've asked judges to try and refrain from giving less than 12-month sentences, because they noticed that if you were put into jail for less than 12 months, 60% of people reoffended. So they're looking at more like community-based sort of curfews and sort of electronic tagging. So that's the plan. As you can imagine, there has been a lot of backlash against this. But you got to look at one aspect, is that the reason that there's more prisoners in jail is because the sentences were extended during previous governments. So that meant there was more people in prison for longer. So now they're trying to sort of retrofit that. But at the same time, if you're a victim and you've been a victim of any crime, then you're not going to be particularly happy about this at all, I'd imagine.
No, absolutely. And Gemma, interestingly, this policy includes sex offenders and domestic abusers being released early. This is a little bit of where this backlash is coming from. How will the government actually guarantee safety in the community? Because that would be frightening, Shane, as you said, for the victims.
Yeah, I mean, in short, they can't. There can't be any guarantees here. And yeah, especially for victims who are most likely to be female. The only way to protect the community from sex offenders, and it really depends if you believe in that they can be rehabilitated. But chemical castration, it only works for as long as the medication is taken. So there's so many aspects around this. So first of all, you're trusting that the person that is taking the medicine on a regular basis. And secondly, there has been research into the use of these drugs. And the research, it's still quite small, to be honest, but it said that it's only really effective when done with psychotherapy as well, quite intense psychotherapy. So again, this is where the can they be rehabilitated kind of question comes in. Now, we read if you're from the UK, you read every day that there's the strain on the National Health Service, and already non-criminals accessing mental health, psychiatrists and therapists, there's a couple of years wait for that. So again, this is another aspect to it, is where are all these psychotherapists going to come from in order to treat these criminals? So for me personally, I believe that a sex offender is always going to be a danger to the community. I know in America they have registrations, you can go online and you can look at people who are living in your area. Yes. I don't know if they have that in the UK, but I don't know if that's... I don't think that they do.
I think there is a sex offenders registry,
yeah.
But I'm not 100% sure. Can you look up
go online and look
lives within your community? I think that is definitely in the States.
Yeah.
I could be possibly wrong, but I wasn't aware of that being in the UK. But also just what you touched on there, Gemma and Shane, I don't know if you agree with me, but we've heard about cuts to policing. We've heard about cuts to jail, guards in jails. No one wants to do those jobs because things have got so out of hand. Yeah. And now you're saying that people could go on community service and, if, they have this elective castration, they might be let out into the community earlier. But there's no one to police this, really.
No, and also, I'm of the opinion that, yes, I think, people can be rehabilitated, but also I think the biggest deterrent is the fact that you can go to jail and you can get a hefty sentence, and that is a deterrent. But if you're a sort of petty criminal by occupation in whatever part of the UK, then if you think, oh well, I'm not going to get the 12-month sentence, I'm just going to be around the community, have a bit of a curfew, and wear an electric tag. I don't. That deterrent then is not there at all. So it's just encouraging you to keep on a life of petty crime. So I think the deterrent, but I'm a business journalist. At the end of the day, you have to look at the numbers. So if it's costing like nearly £54,000 per prisoner, and the number of them is going up, then the government has no option. They're trying to build more, but if they're going to build them more and quicker, where are you going to take that money from? Out of the British government, out of the budget? You can't take it from the NHS. You're putting more into the defence. So where's the money going to come from to do this? So it's again, being a leader of a country is not something I want to do. Making these kind of decisions is tough, but I think not having that deterrent is not. Crime rates are going to go up, as far as I would predict, in the UK.
I think for me, what we know now about crimes of a sexual nature is that it's never about sex. It's not about sexual attraction. It's about power. And that's why sort of the main victims are women and children who are perhaps perceived as being powerless. So the fact that if you're not going to tackle that absolute core aspect of these offences, it is just putting a Band-Aid on the problem rather than going into the actual problem. So there were recent clinical trials in Sweden of one of these drugs. It was a small trial, 52 men. And the results showed after 2 weeks of the first injection, because you continue to take the injections, the men said they had a significantly reduced risk of committing child sex abuse. Now, Predators, by their very nature, are liars and they're manipulators. So I don't know how you get results from this research. Are you talking to the people involved in it? Because how can you trust what they're going to say? If you're measuring hormones that, with regards to the lowering of sexual, hormones and sexual attraction.
Testosterone is what it lowers, yeah.
That's still nothing to do with the inherent power that is at the root of this issue.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And also, I think when I Googled this story before we came on air, all of the headlines were sort of about, the castration and of sex offenders. So I think that should have been taken out of the equation. And I'm surprised that whoever looks after communications for these reports didn't realize that. And it should have been on a tiered system where, the BBC, all of these reports focused on the sex offenders issue. And then, forget about, just the day-to-day crime,
yes.
Which is, going to be prevalent and hit a lot more of the population.
Absolutely, and I think that has become a big problem in the UK. If it's crime when it comes to shoplifting, if it's mobile phone crime, there's been a massive rise of that. But I just wonder right now where the UK is at the moment, where Labour is. I don't know if this is a question that you could answer, or maybe I'm just thinking way too out of the box here. But I feel like we see the Labour government and they're making decisions and they're putting ideas out there, but this is nothing concrete in this policy here. And like you said, Shane, it's not long until these prisons are at capacity.
No. It's quite Trumpian, isn't it, to just kind of say things and then perhaps hope a bit later on, see what sticks. But I don't think that's Labour Party's MO.
Yeah, I suppose it could be in the sort of, you're right, it could be Trumpian. Maybe they are being, maybe I'm wrong, maybe they are being smart. Everyone's going to talk about the sex offenders and then they'll take that out like it's a concession. And everyone goes, oh, well, thank God for that. There's no sex offenders getting out early. And then focus on the actual policy itself. So it takes over sort of the agenda, like we're talking about it right now. So I think, I don't want to get into Labour versus Tory, but it was a Tory problem, like I said before, because they didn't invest in the prison systems over the last 14 years. And I have seen a lot of Tories in reports sort of condemning this, saying that electric tags aren't as good as bars. But I'm thinking, well, you're in government for 14 years and only added 500 spaces. So.
And David Gauke, who actually commissioned this review, was Conservative, which I thought was quite interesting because they said it was an independent review. So actually it did come from someone who is from within the Conservative Party. So maybe Labour are trying to possibly get it right this time round. But lots to speak about there and lots of interesting points. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story now. A new sport competition allowing the use of doping substances will launch in Las Vegas next year. The enhanced games will include events like swimming, athletics and weightlifting. However, critics like the World Anti-Doping Agency have opposed the project, warning athletes they risk bans and their health. Enhanced Games CEO co-founder Christian Angermeyer says his competition can coexist with the Olympics. Take a listen.
So I would say using performance-enhancing substances should be fully legitimized if it's in a transparent way. So I actually think, because people always want to sort of pit us against the Olympics, I think we're going to be, over time, two very different events which can totally, very lovingly coexist with each other.
Oh, Gemma, will you be watching these games?
I will
What
not.
an event it would be.
Kind of, they're like a prelude to Hunger Games for me, this kind of thing. I'm frequently horrified by what billionaire tech entrepreneurs come up with for their own entertainment. So one of the co-founders as well is a guy called Aaron D'Souza. He's an Australian tech billionaire. And the games are backed by Donald Trump Jr. and PayPal founder Peter Thiel. So lots of billionaires here doing something for their own entertainment, in my opinion. Now, for Aaron D'Souza, on his Instagram bio, he says he's on a mission to build a new super humanity. That sounds shivers down my spine. Superhumanity, my goodness. Now, I did see he's only got about 2,000 followers on Instagram, so you know, I'm very surprised. Mark Zuckerberg has 15.7 million, so I'm a bit like Aaron. Are you just upset that you don't have lots of followers and you're trying to drum up,
trying to make
you know, excitement? Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So the word superhumanity is kind of, I don't like that at all. It just sounds genetically modified. It sounds like eugenics, to be honest with you. And there's this notion at the moment among the super wealthy that they can somehow defy age or cheat death. There's the guy the billionaire who's spending lots of money. His name escapes me for a moment, but he's spending millions to cheat death. And I find it horrific. I do, like I say, I wasn't joking about Prelude to Hunger Games. I find it quite dystopian. I don't find it entertaining.
And I guess that is absolutely, legitimate. It's doping, it's putting drugs into your body, it's trying to get you to a level that naturally you just possibly couldn't get to. Yeah. And that's difficult. But there is an argument for this, I think.
Well, yeah, I'm really sorry, Gemma, but I love this. I can't wait till this comes out. When is it? May next year, I think, in Las Vegas.
I will also be watching it. I'm kind of with Shane on this.
Oh, I can't wait. Like, since I was, could speak, I remember watching the Olympics going, and there was unfortunately, we've had a couple of Irish Olympians who've fallen foul of drug tests, and it's been very tragic and upsetting. But I always thought, why couldn't we have a version where you can just pump them full of drugs and then see how far they can run and how fast they can run?
I agree, and what world records they could break.
I know, exactly.
So interesting.
I'm against makeup testing on rabbits, but I can give humans loads of drugs all they want and let them run as fast as they can and see how far they can go. It's wrong, I know, but...
Well, rabbits can't give their consent, can they?
That's true,
Humans can give their consent,
Yes, that's true. And, I would just like to see how far can they go, and then you could maybe get Usain Bolt to go against the
top doper.
Top doper, yeah.
But I'll tell you something. This is what I thought about. So you and I probably have a similar thought to this. Gemma, I get where you're coming from. Yeah. But I've always thought that. I've always thought in sport, let them dope, and if they want to. But what these guys are saying with the enhanced games is you can dope, but it's going to be monitored. It's going to be regulated, and we're going to have doctors with you all the time.
You don't want someone to get to the finish line and have a heart attack.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think it's going to be like they can just... It's a free-for-all. I think it's going to be monitored, and they're going to have to declare what they're taking and how much. So it's actually, it can't just be like these guys are just going to take whatever they can.
You'll see them all like with massive necks and stuff like that, and looking absolutely distorted. But in a purely viewer point of view, entertainment value will be immense, and it'll get huge ratings, and I don't know who's going to sponsor it. I can't imagine what brands are going to sign up for something like that, but I will definitely be watching it. And I don't know if I'd want to go to Vegas and see it in person, but I would definitely watch it on TV.
Well, it's actually really interesting because I want to let Gemma feel a bit included here, because earlier I spoke to a former Olympic speed skater, Sarah Lindsay. Here is what she had to say. Take a listen.
I heard that they're offering, I think it was £1 million to break records, which is so irresponsible. You've got young athletes, and yes, they may be adults and can make their own decisions, but they're being influenced, by huge amounts of money. Most amateur sports, even the top athletes in those sports will never see that kind of money. So, of course, that's going to entice people to compete in this style. So I just think it's so irresponsible, and the long-term effects of performance-enhancing drugs as well, that you're being told by doctors that you're going to trust, and your superiors, as far as your coaches and performance directors go, if they're encouraging you to do this, then you're going to believe them. Money into protecting sport and stopping people doping rather than encouraging it. It just seems so backwards to me.
I thought it was interesting that she brought up the money, because it could be $1 million if you break a record, and that is a lot of money, especially if you're an Olympian and you're part of a whole team. So I wonder if this is going to be the attraction.
I mean, the money will be... the money in sport in general is quite mind-blowing, really.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if that's It is at sort of if you're Federer or if you're the higher level. But during the last Olympics, they did a report on sort of general British Olympians who were competing, and a lot of them were on like really, really low wages. Like some of them had to set up,
So they have day jobs as well.
Or OnlyFans accounts, some of them, in fact.
Also the divers.
Probably, yeah. You can look that up yourself if you want. So a lot of them are not really well paid. That's an illusion that a lot of people think.
Yeah.
So, the millionaire sports stars are the creme de la creme. So there is a case, that if you're sort of on, like an Olympian sort of diver and you're only on like £35,000 or something, and then if you can get $1 million by doping yourself up and getting all of this attention and media attention, and, maybe get, a sponsor and a blogger, there is that attraction. I can see how it will attract people. I just wonder where the financing for this is coming from. Maybe you said it's just tech billionaires doing it.
It's tech billionaires, and I almost picture it like Running Man, or I picture all the tech billionaires around some sort of cage throwing money into the cage. That's how I see it. In the young adult dystopian novel I'm going to write about this, that's one of the scenes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned the creme de la creme of people in sport, because as well, for me, this throws up the question of sometimes you're just not good enough. We've all had things in our lives that we've perhaps wanted to do that would have been amazing, but we just didn't have the talent, we didn't have the skill, we just couldn't get there. And understanding your limitations is part of being human. And I don't buy into this aspect that any one of us can do anything. We simply can't.
Yeah, but if you could take a pill that would get you that extra 5-10% that of whatever particular sort of dream that you have, would you take it?
But the pill
like the Matrix.
In this case is so, like the side effects that we know of these steroids and the doping, we know, doctors know, the research is there, that it's terrible.
But then the flip side of it is, like you did mention, the world was an anti-doping agency, so they're against it, which is understandable. But then the flip side is that, are we assuming then that the normal games are completely like 100% clean?
But we know
the surveys we've done that is not the case.
And we know that's not the case.
Yeah.
I mean, we just saw the world #1 tennis player, Yannick Sinner. He came off a recent doping ban in tennis. Maria Sharapova played tennis at a high level, the same thing. We saw a lot of the famous 100-meter athletes.
Lance Armstrong
famously too. So is this happening, but the technology is not catching up with it, or the testing is not as advanced as the doping? There's a whole lot of questions around this, but I do think it's really interesting. And I do agree with you, Gemma. I think sometimes we forget our limitations. We can't live forever, and we can't always be that 5% better. I don't know. I agree. Great topic, though. And finally, we've reached that point in the show where Shane and Gemma tell us their quirky stories of the day. And Shane, yours is about the singer Jim Morrison.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was just thinking on your last point, like if I could take a pill to be a good singer, I probably would. Actually.
Do you want to be Jim Morrison?
I do, of course. Who does?
He's super cool.
I know.
But he died at 27.
And I'm a lot more than 27.
And we're glad that you're still here.
Yeah,
so,
thanks very much.
So, don't take that pill.
So basically what happened was in 1971, Jim Morrison was in a bathtub in Paris and he died. We don't know why, we don't know how, let's not go into that. But when he was buried in Paris, there was a marble bust put on his grave, and in 1988 it went missing. We don't know how, we don't know why either. It was rumored that it was carried away, but it's 128 kilograms. So on the shows that I've done, we've done various things where people have found random things in their attic, and the Magna Carta version turned out to be real.
Yes, we spoke about that,
So then the police were doing a raid on an apartment in Paris, and what do they find? This marble bust of Jim Morrison. And so this has shown up after 37 years. So I love these stories where some sort of cultural icon or something like that is found hidden away that's been sort of gone for years. So I really like this story. And like I was saying before, I would twist it around to ask you guys that which dead celebrity, obviously, his grave, would you like to go and visit? Obviously, they're dead.
Gemma's been to Jim
I've been to Jim Morrison's
really?
grave. Yes, it's in Père Lachaise in Paris.
She's been.
Oscar Wilde is there as well. There's a lot
Yeah.
of very famous people there.
Do you like going to graveyards? Is it something?
It's what I do in my spare time.
Oh, very good.
Yes, very much so. And it is like
you
a
leave a
shrine.
little
We had a little toast. We did back. I love the Doors. Back then, I was very, it was cool to be into the Doors as well as a teenager.
Yeah, Riders on the Storm.
Very much, So yeah, that people have written Doors lyrics, around the grave. They go, they visit. It's a real place for people to go and just kind of, pay their respects. So it's a pretty cool place. Are they going to put the bust back?
Well, the most recent report, they said that it hasn't been decided.
Okay.
But also whoever had it knocked the nose off, which is quite tragic as well. So I don't know.
Well, we're going to have to move on because we are fast running out of time. And Gemma, you've come up with a story about a wedding trend that I have never, ever heard of in my life, but apparently it ends in divorce. So
yeah, it's the wedding trend where the bride and groom sort of smush the wedding cake in each other's faces, which is quite an American tradition. And so this is a story online, and a guy went to a wedding with his wife, and the bride and groom had cut the cake, and at the last minute, as the groom was lifting a forkful of cake to his new wife, he decided to smear it all across her face, but he stabbed her in the face with the fork. And the guy said then there was this awkward 5 minutes where the bride is basically bleeding on her dress and holding a napkin to her face. And it kick-started a whole discussion about whether people who do that are more likely to get divorced.
well, to be honest,
That's not shock horror.
That's not official research, by the way. This is just internet theory.
chit-chat.
But I find it bizarre that a bride would have spent all her money on her hair and her makeup and her dress, and obviously the groom in his tuxedo or his suit, and they're just going to smear cake in each other's faces. I think it's bizarre.
I wouldn't do it. I don't know.
No,
I've never been married, but I can't imagine that being my kind of jam.
I did not do that.
Did you do that, Gemma?
No.
No.
But you would both have to agree with it, right? But in this wedding, the bride is just waiting for a bit of cake and the groom just decided to go rogue.
That's mad. That is so funny, isn't it?
That is when you're like, who did I marry?
Yeah.
It literally happened 10 minutes ago, but who did I marry?
And then it didn't last much longer after.
No, they were divorced after 10 months.
10 months, that's all?
That, yeah.
I thought it'd be quicker than that now.
You thought it would be the next morning, did
10
you?
minutes, probably.
Annulment. But that, thank you so much for that. I really enjoyed that. Great show today. Thank you so much for those quirky stories. And that's all we've got time for today. Thanks to today's guests, correspondent and columnist Gemma White and Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Gulf Insights. G&T with Michal Prendergast is coming up next. Goodbye and have a lovely evening.